Well, we all love threats from foreign countries, don't they? Particularly when they come from China, when they tell us to do something that is totally outrageous. Well, it's happened again because the Chinese government are now demanding that a UK-based human rights group shuts down its website. It's all to do with freedoms in Hong Kong. Benedict Rogers joins us, good friend of the programme, founder and chief executive of Hong Kong Watch. What have you done now, Benedict?
Well, I woke up on Thursday morning to find... firstly, a letter from the Hong Kong police in my email inbox, and then a couple of hours later, a letter from the Hong Kong National Security Bureau saying that we must take down our website because it violates Hong Kong's national security law, it poses a threat to China's national security, and that we must do so within 72 hours, and failure to comply would result in a fine of the equivalent of £10,000, and anything between 1 year and life in prison. So,
well, let's dissect that in a moment. What is Hong Kong Watch for our listeners?
So Hong Kong Watch is an organisation that I co-founded in the end of 2017, basically because at that time, it's changed now, but at that time, hardly anyone was really speaking out for Hong Kong. So we're an advocacy organisation. We research developments in Hong Kong, and we try to provide a voice for Hong Kong in Westminster, in Washington, D.C., Brussels, and around the world.
So the threats that they've made, a fine of £10,000, well, what jurisdiction do they have to impose that fine on somebody who's based in the United Kingdom?
Well, exactly. They would say that the national security law has an extraterritoriality clause in it, and that's true, it does. And I remember when the national security law was imposed on Hong Kong, that was one of the many very concerning features of it. So what that clause says is that it doesn't matter if you're a Hong Kong resident, a foreigner, anywhere in the world, you can breach the national security law. How they enforce it, of course, is a different matter. And I think in the UK, there's really nothing they can do. I'm already banned from Hong Kong. So the irony, somebody said to me today, how are they going to jail you when they banned you? But I guess the only practical implication that I will have to take into account is travel to countries that have extradition agreements with Hong Kong. But otherwise...
And are there many of those?
There are quite a few, particularly in Asia. I think most European countries, and including the United Kingdom, suspended their extradition agreements when this law was imposed. But some of Hong Kong's neighbours in Asia and some other countries further afield still have theirs.
And do you fear that they're going to try and basically hack your website to bring it down?
Well, that's obviously a concern, and we are taking cybersecurity advice. And I mean, so far they haven't actually, up until now, over the last several years, haven't attacked our website. But of course, obviously we're not going to comply, so that is a danger.
But if this happens to you here, I mean, goodness knows what the repercussions are for people in Hong Kong who might decide to launch a blog or a website and say things that the Chinese authorities wouldn't like.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, our website actually about 3 weeks ago was blocked in Hong Kong. That was obviously the first sort of silo in this, and then came these letters. But yes, in Hong Kong, independent media has been pretty much completely shut down. The Apple Daily newspaper was forced to close. Stand News, which was the other remaining pro-democracy outlet, has been forced to close. So, yeah, it's now extremely dangerous for anyone in Hong Kong to speak out.
I spoke to Nathan Law, who's had to flee Hong Kong and come to this country to live. He's written a brilliant book called Freedom. If you missed that interview, do go back and listen to it. It's on Global Player or YouTube. And his successors, I mean, if I can call them that, I mean, are they... I mean, you have to be pretty brave now in Hong Kong to speak out, don't you? And I think all the time I was interviewing him, I just kept thinking to myself, God, this is a really brave guy. And yet, the sort of Chinese bots commented after the interview, oh, yeah, he's so brave that he's coming to the United Kingdom and can't go back to Hong Kong. How do you exhibit or demonstrate that you are against what's happening in Hong Kong without fearing that you'll be jailed?
I think you can't. I mean, most people that I know well, who I no longer have contact with since the national security law, are either in jail, on trial, or have left Hong Kong.
How has Hong Kong changed has COVID actually played into China's hands on this, where they already had a lot of control, but COVID presumably gave them a lot more? It's been much more difficult for anybody to do anything against the rules.
Yes, exactly. I mean, in the last couple of years, Hong Kong has had this horrific sort of double whammy of both political repression and then all the COVID restrictions. And they have some of the most severe COVID restrictions in the world. And I know Hong Kongers actually who came to London this past Christmas for a visit, and they still can't get back to Hong Kong because of the quarantine requirements.
And in terms of where Hong Kong goes from here, do you think that this is going to be an inexorable clamping down by the Chinese? OK, they've done it quite a lot already, but where do you think we'll be in 10 years' time?
Well, I think if things continue on the path they're on, Hong Kong will end up as basically another mainland Chinese city under the total direct repression of the Chinese Communist Party. But more than that, I think that if the Chinese regime isn't made to face some consequences for what it's done to Hong Kong, then it will just be emboldened both potentially to become even more aggressive to Taiwan and the South China Sea, but also to do more of what they've done to Hong Kong.
But that ship has sailed, hasn't it? I mean, frankly, I would love to think that Britain on its own could stand up to China and take requisite action against its flagrant breaches of the 1997 agreement. But that's just not realistic, is it? And that agreement runs till 2047. We're now in it's still got another 24 years to go, and yet it's totally unrealistic to think that we can do anything about it.
I think we certainly could impose. We haven't imposed any sanctions. I think we could impose targeted sanctions, and better still would be if we did it with our allies, because China is very good at retaliating and playing divide and rule against individual countries. But if Britain, Canada, the EU, together with the US has done some, but it could do more, Australia, if we all acted together, that would have quite an impact, I think, on China.
And just finally, on the number of Hong Kongers that have come to this country since Britain basically gave, well, you explain who's eligible to come here, but it's quite a substantial group of people, isn't it?
It is, and it's actually just recently expanded further as a result of some of our advocacy efforts. So basically, potentially up to 3 million Hong Kongers who have British national overseas status will be eligible to come here. And we've just recently persuaded the government to extend that to young Hong Kongers born after 1997 but who have one BNO parent, to enable them to travel independently of their parents, because these are some of the young people who are most vulnerable as a result of the protests in 2019.
And how many have come already?
I think the figure is around 100,000 so far.
And was that expected?
Yes, I think it was. It may even have been slightly slower because of COVID, and I think what we've seen is the first wave of people who got out because they really needed to get out. We'll then see more people getting out because they're worried about their children's education or just the future in Hong Kong.
OK, Benedict Rogers, thank you very much. And hopefully your website will still be up when I look in about a week's time.
Absolutely.
But if it's not, we'll have you back. That's Benedict Rogers from Hong Kong Watch.